Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Modern Network, presented by our expert technical instructor at New Horizons, Greg Teague. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting in moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the session. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or that Q&A after the webinar for our short Q&A. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Mario. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good middle of the night, depending upon where you're seated at right now. So we're here to talk about navigating the modern network, right? And hot topics, right? Emerging topics, particularly applying to Cisco CCNA training and certification. As Mariella mentioned, I am Greg Teague. I'm a senior technical instructor here at New Horizons. I've been with the company for 23 years, been in the industry for 37. Currently hold Cisco CCNP, CCNA, CCSI certifications. I've had other over the years. Those are the current ones. But I want to talk through some of this stuff. And as Mariella mentioned, we will have some time for questions at the end as well. And if something comes up during, feel free, right? Hit us up in chat or something like that. So navigating, hello, okay? Navigating the modern network. So things change, right? Things change over time. And, in the evolving network landscape that we're dealing with, one of the first and most fundamental things that we have to consider is just simply increased network complexity, right? We got more stuff, right? Back in the day, when I started in this business 37 years ago, it was pretty much, compute, thin clients, mainframes, networking was easy peasy. Now we got all kinds of stuff, right? We got our traditional compute devices, we've got wireless, we've got mobile, we've got Internet of Things, so greater complexity. Security is a big deal these days. Wasn't when I started, right? We barely talked about security when I started in this industry in the 80s. Okay. Fast forward, several decades, and security is forefront to what we're thinking about. Really big right now, the rise of automation, cloud integration, and everybody's favorite topic, AI, right? So let's talk about some of this stuff and then take a look at where CCNA kind of fits into all of this. So automation programmability, right? Things like infrastructure as code, IAC. We need to understand that, right? We didn't talk about this stuff 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Scripting as a network engineer wasn't as big a deal in the past as it is now. API interactions, network programmability constructs. And I've been teaching CCNA for 23 years, I think, somewhere along that. And it's really only recently that a lot of these things have made their way in, okay, have made their way into our conversations, right? So security, best practices, threat mitigation, right? These are all things that we need to understand from a networking standpoint. I mentioned wireless security and general security awareness. It goes broader than just the IT staff. Right? So security fundamentals become an important part of this as well. Cloud integration. You may or may not have integration with the cloud. You may have integration to a variety of degrees. We may have cloud managed networks that we need to consider, right? Integrating with cloud service providers. You may be working with AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or whoever. From a Cisco perspective, you may be looking at the Cisco Meraki product line, right? And the integration of cloud management platform in there. And you're seeing Meraki and the interface there integrating with Catalyst services now too, right? So cloud becomes an important part of our considerations these days as well. And organizations have varying degrees of integration with cloud. Some not touch it at all, others highly integrated. So we need to think about what's happening with that and how that affects us. Oops, sorry. I was scrolling on something and I got ahead of myself. Right? Now, where are things going? Right? Where are things going? Things are going towards AI. I mean, it is the hot topic these days, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, that's where everything's going. And we have things like generative AI, where we're using that, right? You're using that to assist in writing your emails and things like that, right? We have predictive AI, where we're looking at automating and optimizing network operations. And then we have data analytics, where we're using AI for that as well, to again, to varying degrees. So we need to think about that end journey, if you will, right? That movement towards AI. So there's a couple things I wanted to share with you. So when I think about, what's hot topics, what's trending, I kind of go and look at Cisco Live, right? If you're not familiar with Cisco Live is the Cisco conference, right? Cisco networking conference that's been around for decades now. It was just about a month ago now, a little less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that, down in San Diego. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend. But when I start thinking about what's trending and what's hot, I go looking at that, right? Because that's where Cisco is saying, this is where we're going. So I wanted to just share a couple of things here coming out of that, okay? Coming out of that. And I'm going to throw a couple of links in here for you guys in chat. I'm going to pull a couple things over here, right? Hopefully this is sharing out. So here's a link for you, right? I got like three of them we're going to be looking at here probably. So this is in essence a foreshadowing, an announcement um, from Jitu Patel, who is let's just get his title correct down here, right? President and Chief Product Officer at Cisco, right? If you've been around Cisco, if you've been around Cisco Live, G2 is kind of one of the big guys. And what he's talking about in here, what he's foreshadowing going into the conference, was this change, if you will, from not just generative AI and predictive AI, okay, but agentic AI, okay, where we're looking at the automation, if you will, right, artificial intelligence augmentation of problems in the network, right? Not just coding, not just debugging software, but looking at how do we make things work from a networking standpoint, right? Our devices communicating and running AI processes to help, okay, to help with the process, right? And so they start talking about agentic AI, right? Some info on that there. And one of the big points there is that AI is network constrained. We have huge, huge dependencies on lots of networking, lots of throughput for AI, right? Really, really lots of throughput from a networking standpoint, because agentic AI is going to require things like multi-cloud, multi-model, multi-agent architectures. And so communication amongst these systems becomes paramount, right? And to give you a sense of the emphasis Cisco's putting on AI, right? If I hop over to the Cisco Live page, right, I'll give you guys a shot on that, okay? If I hop over there, right, there's the wrap, right? Join them next year in Vegas, right? Hope to be out there. But they've published out the keynotes and the like, and I just kind of want to pull some of this up to give you some emphasis, right? So I wasn't able to attend myself, right? I'm kind of dealing with some post-operative knee surgery stuff here. But if you take a look at the center stage presentations, okay? Take a look at the center stage presentations here. Okay? These are like the main ones. These are the ones they're streaming during the conference and everything. And look at all the emphasis on AI. Okay? AI, 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 right? There are probably, I don't know, 15, 17 in here, and they're all focused on AI. Okay. They're all focusing on AI, well, largely anyway. Okay. So what we need to consider is how do we get there? Right? How do we get to that AI endpoint, if you will? And you don't just turn around and go tomorrow, okay, we're going to implement AI across our network. You have to understand things. Okay? You have to understand how networking works. You have to understand the fundamentals. You have to have that basic knowledge, right? I live in Indianapolis. We have a big race around here called the Indy 500. You might have heard of it. Okay. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be a race car driver, right? Because I grew up around the Indy 500, right? My dad was a smart man, and he's like, "Well, son, if you're going to go racing, first you got to learn to drive, right? You got to learn how the car works. You got to understand physics, right? Downforce, things like that, draft, etc." And his point was very valid. It's not just the skill set of turning left and pushing down on a gas pedal. You got to understand the underlying mechanics, and that's where CCNA leads us into this journey towards network AI operations. So let's take a look and talk about, because a common question that comes up is what's included in the CCNA? What do we cover? What do we talk about? So I want to walk you through that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the exam itself. And then we got questions, be happy to go through those. So I've literally just pulled the outline, right? And I want to talk about how this stuff is integrating in. So we have on day one, it's a very robust outline, by the way. We have a lot of networking fundamentals, right? Exploring the functions of networking, introducing host-to-host communication, so things like OSI model and the like. Working in the command line, operating Cisco iOS software, introduction to LANs and LAN communications, layer 2 communications, TCP/IP link layer, right? Data link layer, starting a switch, fundamental access layer switch operations. Day 2, we get into everybody's favorite subject, subnetting, right? IP addressing, subnetting, binary decimal conversion, all that stuff that everybody groans about when they start thinking about a Cisco exam, right? Because it comes up on all of them. We move up into the transport and application layers. We get into the functions of routing and fundamental configuration of routing. We look at the underlying packet delivery process. How do we communicate across the network, right? Because a lot of times it's really interesting to see from an instructor standpoint, it's really interesting to see that a lot of people will come in to one of these training classes, and I teach not only the CCNA, I teach the CCNP, right? The Encore and the NRC, which are natural follow-ups to this. It's interesting to see the number of people that, oh, well, I've always put these commands in, but I never really understood what was going on under the seats. And that's one of the big values of CCNA is really understanding fundamentally what's happening under the seats. Okay? What's happening here? Troubleshooting in a fundamental and a basic network. Okay? Basic IPv6, right? Some of you may be running IPv6, some of you may not. Okay? But you're using IPv6 networks whether you realize they're not, right? If you got one of these things, you're using IPv6 network because the data networks for pretty much all the phone carriers are IPv6 enabled. You're just a passenger along the way. We get into fundamentals of routing. How does routing work? How do we get traffic from point A to point B? Because that's what networking is about, right? Getting traffic from point A to point B. Right? We get into segmentation, looking at VLANs and trunking. So how do we logically segment at layer 2? How do we do inter VLAN routing and retagging? And we get into the fundamentals of dynamic routing, OSPF. This is probably the most common routing protocol in use these days. Then we move into some additional topics, right? Building redundant switch topologies. So looking at spanning tree protocol, building redundant switch topologies with ether channels. So port bundling, link aggregation control protocol, things like that. Fundamentals of ACLs. We get into internet connectivity, which is things like address translation and the like. And then we start getting into some foreshadowing into some of these deeper topics, right? Introducing AI and ML and network operations. I've been teaching this class for 23 years now. That's new. We didn't talk about that stuff. We didn't talk about virtualization, which we talk about it here a bit as well until the last couple of years. And so we're trending in that direction. Okay. And as you progress through, if you were to go through, say, an Encore or an RC, we go deeper into it, right? We get into virtualization, we get more into AI and the like. We round out the week, okay? We round out the week looking at system monitoring, managing devices, and securing. And then if you've been around the Cisco curriculum anytime in the last 5 years or so, if you've taken a Cisco training course in the last 5 years or so, they did a rework like 5 years ago. Right. So CCNA, right? Since that's what we're talking about. CCNA used to be two classes, right? Interconnecting Cisco network devices part one, interconnecting Cisco network devices part two. They consolidated that down, right, into one 5-day class. But they didn't consolidate all the material. So there is, by design in the course, right, to make sure everybody's aware, there is a self-study element to it, right, that is there by design. Right? There's a self-study element to it where we get into some more of these technologies, right? Looking at layer 3 network redundancy, which would be first hop redundancy protocols, WAN technologies, QoS, wireless, virtualization, right? So introducing architectures and virtualization. And here, software-defined networking, network programmability, right? Security threat landscape, threat defense technologies. So we're moving and building that foundation for where we're going towards programmability, towards automation, towards AI. But without those underlying skill sets, without understanding how we get traffic from point A to point B, how routing protocols work, you you can't automate something that you don't understand how it works. Right? If you don't understand how it works, you don't really have any business automating it. And so the purpose of the CCNA is to really drive that foundational knowledge, to give us that platform that we can expand upon and move into things like automation, virtualization, and artificial intelligence, which are the direction things are going. But without that fundamental understanding, you're just going to be lost in it. Right? So if we look at, let me switch here really quick. If we look at where CCNA fits into the grand scheme of things, okay, we look at that. Let me get a pen here. Okay. So CCNA, one exam, right? Used to be a couple exams. We'll talk about exam topics here in a moment, and then we'll get to some questions and the like. But the CCNA is the foundation. Right now, they used to have, right? If you go back 5+ years, they used to have multiple different CCNAs, right? You'd have a CCNA routing and switching, and a CCNA security, and a CCNA wireless, and a CCNA collaboration, and a CCNA data center, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when they redid everything 5+ years ago now, right? It was March 2020, bad timing, right? They broke it out to where the specializations are occurring at the CCNP level, right? So the most fundamental CCNP, enterprise core, right? But CCNA is feeding into all of these, right? If you're going through security, if you're going through service provider, if you're going through collaboration, if you're going through data center, you got to know this stuff, right? It's kind of like wanting to be a race car driver. You got to know how to drive before you can become a race car driver, right? You got to know those fundamental elements, and that's where CCNA fits, right? It's providing that foundation, it's providing that base knowledge, and yes, it's foreshadowing and looking at and introducing a lot of the things we're going to be working on moving forward, right? You get into things like cloud connectivity out here, and you get into advanced routing and switching and virtualization and moving into some of these areas, but they're all dependent on this foundational knowledge. Right? They're all dependent upon this foundational knowledge. Right? All right, so let's take a look here at the exam. Okay? The CCNA certification exam, current exam number 200-301, and it breaks down into what are called domains. Okay? It breaks down into what are called domains, and there are 6 of them covered on this exam. Okay? Network fundamentals, 20% of the exam. Network access, 20% of the exam. IP connectivity, 25%. IP services, 10, security fundamentals, 10, and automation and programmability, 10 as well. So I want to break this down a little bit here. So when you're looking at that, and let me send you a link for this so you guys have direct access to that as well. Okay. When you're looking at this, right, this is current exam topics, right? The exam is currently available. You have the different domains. And when you expand this out, they're telling you, here's all the different things that we could ask you about from a network fundamental standpoint. Okay? And all these different things. Now, the challenging part from a certification standpoint is they're not going to ask you about all those things, right? They're going to ask you about some of them, right? For network fundamentals, 20% of your test. Let's just say for sake of easy math on Greg, let's say there's 100 questions on your test. Well, you would expect 20 of them to come out of the network fundamentals section here, right? And we work through the vast majority of these topics as we work through the CCNA class. Some of it's going to be direct, right? Where we've got the instructor led, right? Where I'm talking about this stuff, because I do teach that class. I'm teaching it next week, as a matter of fact, and a couple of times in August if you want to come see me. We're going through the vast majority of this stuff in here. We're going through labs, right? We got 20 some, 30 some labs in CCNA that we're working on. And you get take home labs with that, right? 60 hours, 90 days access post class. So we're working through this. And yes, some of it's in the self study as well, right? I mentioned that aspect, but we're working our way through here. And so you're getting this guidepost of, okay, they're going to ask me to explain AI, generative and predictive, and machine learning and network operations. They're going to ask me to describe REST-based APIs. And you got to look at those verbs when we're looking at this, right? So here we see things like configure and verify inter-switch connectivity. That means I need to know how to do it. Right? Configure and verify VLANs. That means I need to know how to do it. But if it's describe, I need to conceptually understand it, right? Explain virtualization fundamentals. Right? VRFs, containers, virtualization, etc. So if you're looking at pursuing, whether it's the CCNA certification or really any other certification, always, always, always come look at the exam objectives. Right? Because they're tons. Like when I went to a small college here in Indiana, and I was a history major, right? So how I got an IT sordid story. But I had the same teacher, same professor for like 3 years straight, 8:30 Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I hated it. He loved to give essay exams. And the week before the exam, he'd hand us a sheet of paper because we did things on paper then. And there'd be 5 questions on it. He said, okay, 2 of these are going to be the test next week. Prepare. And what he was telling us was, you're going to have options, right? When the test rolls around, you're going to get two of these questions. Prepare as you feel necessary. Well, this is the equivalent to that. They're telling you, okay, we can ask you about any of these things. We're not going to ask you about all of them, but we can ask you about any of them. Okay? And so this is how you get yourself squared away for it. Right? You look through these exam fundamentals, through the exam topics, right? And that becomes your guidepost. Right? That becomes your guidepost. So the CCNA is foundational. It's always been foundational, right? It's been like the entry point to networking for a lot of people. I mean, you got the CompTIA Network Plus, yes, but from a Cisco perspective, this has been the entry point. Okay, this has been the entry point, and it's foundational, right? And some people are like, it's the same old stuff. Yeah, because it's foundational, but there's also this movement towards the evolutionary stuff, automation programmability. We didn't talk about this stuff. We didn't talk about Ansible and Terraform. We didn't talk about REST APIs. We certainly didn't talk about AI even a couple of years ago. Okay, even a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving and it's changing as the industry changes. And the direction that Cisco is going is clearly down here in item 6, right? Automation programmability. But that doesn't remove the necessity for items 1 through 5. If you don't understand 1 through 5, 6 isn't going to work. Simple as that. Right? 6 isn't going to work. So you probably heard me talking for long enough now. Let's open it up for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, anything in here, feel free. hit me up. If not, thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it informative. And we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to be with us here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg. I went ahead and dropped in a link to more info on the CCNA certification. So if you want a little bit more info on that, or if you want to just take a peek around newhorizons.com, you can go right ahead. And I believe that will do it for us today. So just also want to share with our audience that if they miss out on any part of this session, we will be sharing this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. So be on the lookout for that. Awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking a little bit of your time with us today. And thank you, as always, Greg.
Oh, you're most welcome, Paul. Thank you very much. All right. Good
Shout
to see you.
out, Paul, the best. Awesome. Well, thanks again for all your amazing insight, Greg. And thanks again for joining us, everyone. We appreciate you as always. And we hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Hopefully,
Yes.
we'll see you all very soon in the classroom.
And have a
So,
safe holiday this week if you're celebrating.
absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Of course. Have a fantastic rest of your week and your weekend. So, thanks again, everyone. Bye
Yep.
for
Take care.
now. Talk to you later.
Yep.
Bye.